Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you, Halida, for that lovely introduction. I think that giving really good hugs might be the most important credential among those. And in this setting, I can't give a hug to all of you, but since our session is about interbeing and that relational quality of the universe that Thich Nhat Hanh was pointing us toward, maybe we can do a little relational connection here in this room. So I'm going to invite you to just turn in your chair to somebody sitting next to you. If you know them, give them a hug. If you don't, maybe just a hug with the eyes. Just regard this human who's next to you. We are all connected after all. You can hug with your fingertip. You can hug with your eyes. You can hug heart to heart. Good. We can hug. Thank you. So we are here this afternoon in maybe the most cosmos of the sessions of cosmos and science and faith, this interconnectivity of the wisdom traditions that we're exploring together, and the interconnectivity with the wisdom path that we call science. I think Halida gave a really great introduction to the idea of interbeing, this relational aspect of everything being connected, of seeing back and forth through time, of living in the experience of being at the same time both connected to all that is and moving through life in what seems like being individual, of being spirit and matter, of the absolute levels of truth and the relative levels of truth. These are all existing at the same time. You'll hear me talk more tomorrow about biomimicry. We won't go into that much today, but as Halida was introducing us about interbeing, I remembered about how even us as an individual human being, we're really only ourselves, we really only have about 10% human DNA. The rest of us is microbes and bacteria and all kinds of creatures that live inside these beings that keep us going as a human being. So that if you took away the human part, we'd still be recognizable, right? 10%. So we are tied up in a web of mutuality and coexistence. And that's what this session is going to explore from a number of different wisdom traditions, from an Indigenous path of understanding, from the Buddhist understanding, and from the Christian understanding. So I'm going to introduce each of our speakers, this esteemed panel of deeply wise and heartful folks. I will introduce all three. When I'm done introducing, let's welcome them with a round of applause. And then we will hear from each of our speakers, and we will engage in dialogue both along the way and toward the end. So I will start by, our first speaker will be Women Stand Shining, Pat McCabe, who is a sister from New Mexico with me, a Diné mother, grandmother, activist, artist, writer, ceremonial leader, and international speaker. Truly somebody who walks in multiple worlds. Women Stand Shining, Pat is a voice for global peace and an artist. Her paintings are created as tools for individual, earth, and global healing. She draws upon the deep indigenous sciences of thriving life to reframe questions about sustainability and balance. And she is devoted to supporting the next generations. I know one of her children, and I've heard about a second of her children today, and they are also forces in the world fostering change. Women Stand Shining is also conducting experiential retreats in her home state of New Mexico. So if you're interested in that, you can find her and ask her more about that. So thank you for being here with us. Next, we will hear from Gerardo Abboud, also a veteran on this stage. Gerardo is from Buenos Buenos Aires, Argentina, and he was born into a Christian family, educated as an engineer, worked as a financial analyst, before he made a dramatic change in his life that started with traveling to India in the 70s. He resided there and in Nepal for 14 years as a student of Buddhism and became proficient in the Tibetan language. So much so that he has become a translator for Tibetan teachers and carries that wisdom and bridges that wisdom for those of us who don't speak that language. His desire was to leave behind the, quote, life of promotions, high salaries, and consumerism to discover what richness really is within himself. Back in this country in '86, Abboud was nominated president of the Jongguling Center, which offers free teachings in Buddhist theory and practice. And he has served as the Dalai Lama's interpreter in Latin America since 1992. So we are quite fortunate to have you with us, Gerardo. Thank you. And finally, Cynthia Bourgeault. Many of you experienced Cynthia's work this morning if you came to the Christian practice early this morning. Cynthia is a modern-day mystic, an Episcopal priest, writer, and internationally known retreat leader. She spends her time either in solitude at her seaside hermitage in Maine or on her demanding travel schedule, moving around the world to teach and spread the recovery of the Christian contemplative and wisdom path. She's been a longtime advocate of the meditative practice of centering prayer, which we were introduced to this morning. And she is also very involved in interspiritual dialogues around the planet with many other esteemed leaders of different denominations and faiths. Cynthia is a member of the Global Peace Initiative for Women Contemplative Council and a recipient of the 2014 Contemplative Voices Award from Shalem Institute. Thank you for being with us, Cynthia. And let's give all of our panelists a round of applause. I think the 3 minutes of silent grounding is a good thing because now we're going to have our consciousness expanded in all kinds of ways. So take a breath, prepare yourself. And Woman Stand Shining, I'm going to invite you to begin. Thank you.
Yate.
Yate.
So my name is Pat McCabe, and I was also given the name Wiyakpa Najiwi, which translates somewhat into English as Woman Stand Shining. And I'm just really grateful to be here. I want to acknowledge the original peoples, the original caretakers of this land, the Osage Nation, the Shawnee Nation, the Miami Nation, the Cherokee Nation. So thank you, relatives, for all of your deep love and care for this land. And also to all the amazing, passionate Kentuckians that I meet here currently who also love this land. And so we share in that together. So I come from Dene Nation, so I'll introduce myself that way. She'e'iya, tachi inashli, aro ashi ibashishchi, ma'idishkeshne dashanale, klauschi daushiche, guataos dani inashli. So I'm telling you about my clans, just in case we're related by clan here. And just very honored to be here and very honored to be with my colleagues and fellow panelists here. So I really need to start out with a song. The song tells me what we need here. So on my way, I'm trying to remember who it was that told me that the bald eagles are returning to this area, is my understanding. And last year, you also were giving me the history of the Buffalo Trace. So I'm going to start out with an eagle song, and then I'm going to move on to a buffalo song. Heche wambli glashkawa uktakia beku wana ueloyo wana ueloyo wana ueloyo eo eo hueo ea eo we haya heya, we haya heya, we haya heya, we haya heya, hueo, eo, hueo, ea, eo. Heche wambli gleshkawa, ukta kia beku, wana ieloyo, wana ieloyo, wana ieloyo, eo, eo, hueo, ea, eo. Wachi, wa uelo, wa yonki eloyo, wachi, wa uelo, wa yonki eloyo, ho, wachi, wa uelo, wa yonki eloyo, ho, wachi, wa uelo, wa yonki eloyo, heo. Ta tanka hoya te ki wa chi e wa uelo wa yonki eloyo heo. Wa chi wa uelo wa yonki eloyo ho. That buffalo spirit. They are here. So I needed them to come and be here with me. We need them. We need their wisdom. We need their understanding of how to be here now. So I'm going to begin with something that I often begin with to kind of orient us in a new way. Because frankly, probably the vast majority of the people sitting in this room, you were not trained to hear me. You were not trained to see me. And not because of my own personal glory or fame, but I think you do need to see me, and I think you do need to hear me. So I often start by talking about this way of orienting. There's a professor, Dr. Greg Cajete, that lives in New Mexico, and he wrote a book called Native Science. And in that book, he talks about how when he was studying the early anthropologists and how they saw indigenous people, he said they always used the words primitive and childlike to describe us, right? And he said, I love him for this, he didn't say, what a bunch of racists, he said, there's a system of thought going on over there that makes it such that every time they see us, that's what comes to their mind. I wonder what it is. That's an elder, right? And so he went to explore, who are these people that are saying these things? Why do they see it that way? Maybe if I understood their culture, I would understand why they see us that way and why they say those things. So as he examined, who were the authors of these books, these papers about us, and he realized that they were primarily English aristocratic men. So he said, all right, let me take a look at them in their culture. And in their culture, what he thought he was seeing, again, he's looking through his lens, so this is his best interpretation. He said, okay, so up until the age of 5 in their culture, they get to sing and dance and play and pretend all they want. But at the age of 5, it's time to get down to the serious business of being the educated man. And at that point, all these other things can become hobbies, but what begins to happen then is the education is all about training and honing the intellect. And so from then on, that's the way. That is the way, principal way of knowing anything. So when these men came over to this part of the world and they saw us, what did they see? Well, we were singing. We were dancing. We were talking to things that they didn't think you could talk to. We were seeing things that they didn't think you could see. And their only conclusion, based upon where they came from, was these must be very primitive people. These must be very childlike people. Even their grown men are engaged in the activities of children. Well, when Dr. Kahete wrote this and I read it, it changed everything for me. That was like one of the big turning points in my life, because it made sense of this world to me. And I think it really makes sense of this dilemma we're in this topic that we're studying all week here. You know, what it said to me was, for my own people, we engage in the song and the dance and the visioning from birth all the way till death. And so we never stopped that way. We don't have this point where we say, okay, that's comes back here. No, we continue those things on. And what I'm going to say about that is the song is a way of knowing. Did you feel how everything changed in this room? Did you feel what happened in your body? The emotional rising, the soaring, So it's a way of perceiving reality in a very different way. And so I call it a way of knowing. And so what I'm going to propose here, and this is true of what we call Indigenous people, and somebody asked me last night, how do you define Indigenous people? And I'm going to say, for our purposes right now, that an Indigenous person is a person that is of place. And so what I see is that these people that we find all over the world who, I mean, part of the hallmark of Indigenous people, right, is their song and their dance. And that's because that's a way of knowing. It's a way of knowing place. So one of the other things that I always say to orient us is to say that if sustainability is the highest and most sought after technology on the planet, who should we be talking to? We should be talking to those peoples who've known how to live in one place over an extended period of time, 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years, in relative health, harmony, and happiness. Those are the premier scientists of understanding how to be here. Now, these same people that continue these practices from birth to death, so I'm going to say that they have a broad spectrum of ways of knowing. Is it a coincidence that having this broad spectrum of ways of knowing and the fact that they have sustainability, is that a coincidence? I don't think so. I don't think so. That's been part of my scientific inquiry. And so I'm going to say that having a broad spectrum of ways of knowing is intimately and intricately connected to sustainability, right? So I feel like I need to say that first before I even begin to talk about interbeing, because if I just started out saying what I wanted to say about interbeing, you would not understand where I am. So part of this dilemma, as I see it, is that science, and I'm going to go out a little bit further, and many faiths, I'm even going to say, have, well, science for sure, is coming out of this intellectual place, right? And so when I look at material science, reductionist thought processes that have really come to dominate our understanding of reality, they're coming from this intellectual place. And what the analogy that comes to mind for me is when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so I'm going to say when all you have is an intellect, everything looks like things to be categorized, problems to be solved. It puts us in a very narrow zone of perception. And I'm going to propose to us, and maybe any of you who've ever been in a relationship of any depth and passion, whether it's between your child or with your sister or brother or your lover, your husband or wife, try going at that relationship with your intellect day after day. What happens? No. No. Y'all know, that's not a good way to go. Right? And so that's what I'm perceiving in this whole conversation, is that when all we have is this place right here to try to make sense of everything that is going on around us, we are missing a big part of this picture. So I want to describe interbeing, and interbeing is a great word. There are very few English words that really describe indigenous concepts. They're completely different structures. In English, something is always doing something to something. And in indigenous language, it's almost all verbs, which is actually closer to what scientists are discovering. Everything is in motion. Everything is energy. I'm not actually a solid thing standing here. My molecule is slowed down and beyond, right? So what I want to say is that interbeing is a word that relates to, I don't think I said that I was also adopted into the Lakota spiritual way of life, and those songs I was singing come from that tradition. And that's where I get my name, Wiakpa Najinwi. But in the Lakota tradition, we talk about the sacred hoop of life. And what we say is that every form of life gets to have a place on this sacred hoop. And every form of life has a perfect design for thriving life. If we go outside and we look beyond all the skyscrapers and everything out here and we find that little patch of earth here and there, if we get down and look at it, what we're going to see is everything there is trying to figure out one thing: how to make more life. How do we make more life? The ants are saying, how do we make more life? The birds are saying, the trees, everything. So I'm going to say the plan in this place is life. That's the plan. That's the creation that we were set in. That's our place, our home. And so what I'm going to say is that every single member of this sacred hoop of life has a perfect design for thriving life. And every single member of this hoop of life has to uphold their part, or the integrity of the hoop begins to fail. And I think that's where we're at the moment. So, as a human being, my question is always, how am I upholding my perfect design for thriving life? And for me, this is where our faiths can come in and tell us, you know. They have something to say about what that design looks like and what the enactment looks like, right? In my faith, I say that I need to be in harmony with all of the rest of the hoop. And actually, what we say is that human beings were the last to arrive here in this place. And that makes all of the other members, all of the other family members of that sacred hoop, my elders. They know much more about how to be here than I do. So it kind of flips some belief systems on its head, I know. But so that's how we hold it. So I'm always looking to my elders to say, how do we be here? That's why I called in that eagle medicine. That's why I called in that buffalo medicine. In particular for this beautiful place of Louisville on the river here in Kentucky. Because they know something about being here. And the fact that the eagles are returning, good job. Good job. So I guess that's how I want to talk about interbeing is I feel like at this point we are looking at, we're coming down to this question of asking, how do we, as the five-fingered ones, remember what our perfect design is for thriving life? And I really love that the words humility have been brought up, because I think we could stand to find that place of humility at this point. So I think I'm going to stop there as laying a little bit of a roadmap for future discussions. And I just really thank you for giving me your attention. And I also, I just want to tell you that I've been told and there'll be more time. I'm actually on several panels more this week. For those of you who are going to be here, that this question that we are working in is crucial for us, that we need to address it. They've called it an archetypal wounding of humanity. How we have been relating to our sciences in particular, what sciences we've adopted and how we implement what we believe we know from them. So we're right on topic, we're in the right place, we're in the right time, and I'm so grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for starting us in song. Thank you for interpreting for us that when song comes from you, it's calling in. Can I ask you a question? You talked about how we need to broaden our ways of knowing. And I experience you as a woman, as a human being, as an Indigenous person who relates to, as you shared with us, multiple Indigenous traditions and pathways, legacies. A Navajo Dene woman living at Taos Pueblo, also carrying the Lakota ways. And you walk boldly through this modern Western world as well. Can you share with the group just a little bit about how you navigate that bridging inside yourself to allow you to do that so skillfully out here in service?
Well, when I was raised, my father went to Stanford University, and I was sent to East Coast boarding school. I attended Phillips Exeter Academy. In those places, I was taught to try to be competitive. And so the goal is to see what someone else is doing and see if you can just up that game just a little bit more, right? And you know, that wasn't sitting in my heart and my body, right? I began to deteriorate. In fact, I came to a spiritual crisis, which is how I ended up being adopted into the Lakota spiritual pathway. And I know that there are many people in the world who are suffering in that way right now. And I know we have young people sitting here as well. And so what ended up happening for me is I was met in a very visceral way by spirit. And that came through the Lakota spiritual practices of the sweat lodge and other things, the songs, learning those songs. And so what ended up happening was I ended up being a part of a community that was beyond human and beyond human ego. And to be met by the earth, to be met by the water, to be met and be called granddaughter in my heart and mind by the water, by the trees, by the wind. You know, it sort of took me out of that mindset. It took quite a long time to heal that. But at this moment, you know, what I know is I love this Mother Earth so much, so much. And I can, you know, like so many people who are on fire in their faith, you know, come to this place of being complete devotion and complete service. So when I walk out here and I see you, you know, what I say to Spirit is, you know, I'm going to do my best to give you a chance to speak to whoever is sitting here right now exactly what needs to be said. And so when it becomes not about me, this is not about me, everything changes. And you know, I call on that larger community to have their input here, to give their voice here. And I was really grateful in the earlier panel before we got to the questions, because I was like, wow, we're not even talking about this amazing branch of the human family of Indigenous knowledge in our solution finding, but it kind of came around to that right at the end. So I was like, all right. Because I do think it's critical. That's why, you know, I'm not here to be cultural show and tell, but that's why our Indigenous cultures are so important for all of us. This is the library of human understanding of how to be here.
Yeah. It's not indigenous knowledge or science. It is indigenous science that is a science all its own. It's meeting. We're at a pathway meeting.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Gerardo, will you share some comments with our group from an entirely different perspective, and I wonder if there may be some overlap as well.
May I ask some question? Yeah,
Sure.
Exactly. No, you spoke, rightly so, that all of us, I think, we are kind of, our knowing is right now confined to the intellect, right, in general. And of course there is another type of knowledge that transcends the intellect. And you also referred to that. So how does it happen in your tradition that you can make that switch, from intellectual knowing into non-conceptual or kind of transcendent knowledge? Is it through song? I mean, I think I understood that when you sing, the singing itself brings you to that kind of transcendent or seemingly transcendent state, right? But how do you remain in that state? Is it something that stays long, or it is just an experience that then disappears, or how does it happen? Is the aim in your tradition of like the inner being, or what is our inner being? Is the aim in your tradition to recognize that inner being, and is that inner being a being that transcends the intellect and has a different type of cognizance or knowing?
Yes, I would definitely say it has a different kind of cognizance and knowing. Well, one, I guess the word that we use these days is either embodied or there's another word. Anyway, kinesthetic. Yeah. So that was the first big switch for me. Was going into a sweat lodge and being literally with fire, water, earth, air when you could get it, and just to be able to pray with my whole body was such a new experience for me. Because in the tradition that I had first been brought into with my grandparents and parents being taken to the Dutch Christian Reformed missionary residential boarding school, so that's how I began. They were raising me in that way, and I felt like my whole body, like so much of me, was not included in that prayer. And so that was one of the things that I really appreciated, was to have this embodied experience. Which automatically, I mean, when you're in the sweat lodge, you can't think. This has to quiet down. In fact, that's what I say when I lead that ceremony, is I say, it's going to be hot until your mind surrenders. But as soon as your mind surrenders, it's not going to be hot in here anymore. Because your mind is screaming like, well, what about this? And how about this? And what happens if this? And, what if it gets, it's like, it's troubleshooting. The mind loves to create problems to solve. And so, yeah, it is a transcendent place. And I think in terms of maintaining that, it's been a process of letting go of that intellectual way of being, and also me-centered, and how am I doing relative to other humans. Letting that fall away then allows for me to be on this earth in a new way. And the earth is here everywhere, all the time, right? So, let's not forget that underneath all this pavement, it's only about, 6 inches, 8 inches maybe? And we got, what do we say? We got like a mile to the center of the earth, or 6 miles. Anyway, it's long, it's big. We're on someplace big. And, when I hear some of the elders say, one heartbeat every 10,000 years, and we're living in that reverberation. That's everywhere. It's right here in Louisville. So it's about reorienting to, again, I'll call it the larger community of flying ones, swimming ones, creepy crawling ones, four-legged ones, and also the spiritual.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Gerardo.
Oh.
I think you were next. Where will you take us?
Okay, so when we talk about the view that of the tradition that I follow, which is the Buddhist tradition, and in terms of what we are, what our inner being or transcendent being is, our true being, I think it's called, no? Like, then we have to talk a bit like that there is a sense of transcendence, even though we now live completely confined to our human experience. There is something of our nature that transcends our human experience. That is not something that will develop deliberately and then it will become like the product of our spiritual practice. We cannot make it. And it is not something that will come in the future. But now then we have to live this human experience up to whatever it lasts, and only then we will transcend. That was not possible to discover that kind of inner being which transcends our human experience. It's not like that. Like what Buddha or the Prince Siddhartha better said, discovered at the moment of enlightenment, is that what he called Buddha nature, well, he didn't call it Buddha nature, I don't think so, but what he found is that this absolute nature, like the transcendent, or this nature of all beings who have consciousness, is totally enlightened. Enlightened meaning that it is perfect, it is infinite. The sublime qualities are completely perfect right there, and in their infinite kind of expression, this infinite compassion, infinite altruism, empathy, loving kindness, and also wisdom, and so forth. But that applies not only to human beings, it also applies to animals as well, and also other beings we do not have contact with right now. But that means to say that it's something that is common to every single sentient being. It is not something that belongs only to Buddhists. I mean, Buddhists don't have a copyright on that. And it is actually like the nature of reality. Not only also the nature of consciousness, but even further, it is like the nature of the whole universe as well, which is a bit more difficult to understand. But anyhow, that is more or less what he expressed. So having said that, then we are now human beings, and as a human being, we last, a certain number of years. Of course, we are not permanent totally and eternal. We live as much as our life goes. And so therefore, our human life is really something which is quite temporary in the sense of what we experience. Right now, we can say, well, the way I experience myself is as a human being, but actually, what am I? Am I really, that's all I am? Is it that? Only a human being and a human experience with my emotions, my history, my traumas, my hang-ups, or all these different aspects that form me as a person, including my body, including my sensations, and so forth. Is that all there is? Or what am I in an absolute level? What am I? So when Buddha speaks that our basic nature is Buddha's mind, or like this Buddha nature, that means to say that we've always been Buddha, not the historical Buddha. Buddha in this case is literally, it means the awakened. We have an awakened nature, awakened from the sleep of ignorance, and also awakened and freed from all kinds of distortions. So that means to say that we have always been a Buddha, we are right now a Buddha, and we will always be a Buddha. That's what makes it that our basic nature is unconditioned, it is uncompounded, it is that is according to the view and what Buddha discovered, that's the way we are. So then the whole thing is that it is immediate. We can always discover that. It's not something that we may see after so many lifetimes, or we may see after death only, when I die, and if I do my things right, then I may have access to that nature, but that may happen. But also, it is possible to contact that nature, because it is always present. It is always present in anything we do, in anything we perceive, in all our emotions, in all our knowing, the things we think about, even in our negative emotions, because everything comes from that basic source, which is our enlightened nature. The only problem, which is a big problem, is that we are not aware of that. And in one way, it's quite simple, but on the other way, it's not so easy to tackle that problem, because actually, we've always been like that. And let's talk about this life. I mean, we were born, and why we repeated this kind of unknowingness since childhood. I mean, when a child is born, the child has a very kind of naked mind, in the sense that they have not built up any kind of concepts about good, bad, short, whatever. I mean, their minds are very close to the nature of their being, to the nature of mind. But then, why is it that the first contact that they have with some kind of reality that appears, will obviously will be the mother, and also, the feeding and the breast and so forth, they will start to perceive it as something external. Nobody taught a child to perceive that as something external, but it always happens that way. It has happened that way with us, and that's the way it happens. So why is it that consciousness reacts in that way, in which as soon as there is an event, cognitive event, even at the basic level of a child, newly born child, then duality between subject and object sets in, and from there, then it becomes more complicated, because then reification comes, and the whole world that we know of myself and other is set in. And that's where we are always living. We are always living within that type of duality of me and other, and myself and other beings and so forth. And basic separateness then starts there. It actually starts before. It starts before, but it's not conscious, it's not operative, but it is in the way of habitual patterns. No? Now, of course, I have to refer to the view of Buddhism that this is not the only life that we have. We come with a backlog of different lifetimes from before, in which we always perpetuated this system of again and again repeating the dualistic perception. So that stands there, and that will influence that basic consciousness to act in that way without even willing to do so. Even us, I mean, now we are developed, we already have piles of education, like primary, secondary, like whatever, college, and we became kind of quite elaborate beings. And yet, even if we want to revert that duality, because we come to an understanding through analysis and logic and realizing that there is nothing that can validate this duality, saying that I exist like in an independent way, like in a concrete way, and therefore because of that belief, automatically there is an other who also exists in an independent and concrete way. That is how all of us, I think, maybe, I don't know, I'm too brash at including the whole audience, but I think that most of us, perceive it that way in terms of myself and other beings. So the thing is that we cannot decide. It's not that one morning I will wake up and then I will say, okay, today I will not be dualistic. I mean, it would be great. It would be great, like a New Year resolution, like all this year I will be. Then, okay, well, next year I will, be. It doesn't happen that way. I mean, we need some system to correct something that really distorts our perception in an instant. It really gains us over all the time. We don't even notice. We are completely set in to that mindset of duality. So when we talk about our basic being, the Buddha, he kind of doubted, because he said, well, this is something so transcendent that I cannot explain it. But then he was asked to teach and so forth. So finally, he said a few words, but all the time warning us that the words do not make the actual nature of what he was describing with words. Because basically, one of the main problems of our basic being or our Buddha nature, it is that it is beyond words and beyond concepts, and is also beyond description. So one would say, because we are always confined to the intellect, that then we cannot know it. Everything we know now is based on concepts, it's based on words, it's based on ideas, it's based on thoughts and all kinds of things that we build up, and therefore we have knowledge, and we can say that we built up a new knowledge that did not exist before. But how can we know something that transcends words and transcends also the concepts and ideas and thoughts? But still he gave us some kind of guidelines, and he said that, Sabsi Todero said Dumache, in Tibetan, Sapa means to, it is profound. He's the most, I think, like something that we have to be quite happy about is that he said, but still it can be known. Even though we cannot know it with our intellect, it can be known. But we have to change our perception. We have to change our way of cognizance, our way of knowing. Can we do that? The good news is that we can do that because the mind is not some kind of block that never changes. Mind is a continuous flux of instants of consciousness. So we can drive that mind and create a space for that mind to recognize its own Buddha nature. And in that way it can change. It can know beyond the intellect also, that possibility. But if we hadn't had someone who could tell us clearly, you can do it, and it can be done, and I've done it, and there is a path that I can show you to do it, then we would not have a system, and it would be always like difficult for us to discover that, because we don't have the means, we don't have the tools. So he said it's profound. Profound means that we cannot know it with the intellect. We have to go further in our consciousness. We have to transcend somehow the way that we habitually know things. And then it also says it is peace, and that is fantastic. That means to say that we have, because our true nature is peace, it means to say it's free from conflict. And free from conflict means well-being, means happiness. That is our birthright, to like a way of saying it is like we basically are, I wouldn't say happy, but I mean, you know, there is an experience of well-being that belongs to us at our most deepest kind of basic level, because we own, that is what we essentially are. And then the third thing he said is that it is free from any kind of conceptual elaboration. We cannot say, okay, now, you know, when we know something, then immediately we pigeonhole it and we say, well, then this exists, but this does not exist. And, you know, we immediately need, our intellectual way of knowing needs to place things in different pigeonholes. Otherwise, it cannot really make all the connections to form ideas and so forth. So, but you cannot say that. You cannot say that it exists, but then you cannot deny it also. And you cannot, there's no other possibility. It's beyond any kind of definition. So that is an important point, of course, because it has to do with the absolute level of truth that I will refer to. I don't know if I have enough time. The clock goes very fast, but
I'll give you a few if you pay me.
And then he said, so in that way, you know, it is like space, because space, you cannot say anything about space. You cannot say that it exists, but I mean, if space were not here, we couldn't even move. We couldn't, I mean, space, but it cannot, you cannot say it exists. There's nothing that can identify space. But unlike space, then mind knows, so it is luminous. That means to say that Buddha nature is cognizance. Buddha nature is primordial wisdom. Buddha nature is something that enlightens everything. It is cognizant and it is also luminous. And then finally, that it is uncompounded and it is not conditioned. That means to say, it will never be a product of our good practice, or we follow the path and then we have constructed this enlightenment that did not exist before. There's nothing new. we just discover what we've always been and what we'll always be, which is our essential being of Buddha nature. But then where are we now at? I mean, because we don't experience that. So Buddha really explains two levels of truth. And right now, we are unaware of that. What is the result of the second one, which is that you cannot say that it exists or it cannot exist. So myself, we, each of us, perceive ourselves as something that really exists. That is to say that the mind, when perceives that kind of essential nature, mistakes it and assumes the idea of an I. Now, I is okay, we have an I, but it's not that real, solid I that we all experience. The problem is that the moment we have the I, that means then we reify it. And reify means we assign a reality on something that by its own nature does not have it. And our I does not have that nature. Our I doesn't, it's just like this assumption, and it is a wrong assumption. We have reified our I. Actually, what we are is this essential being, which is free from any kind of identification, but still we have a very strong sense of identity. But once we have set up the I, then we set up the other. So then already we started with the duality. And the duality brings about all kinds of reifications. The whole world seems to us like real. When we suffer, then we really suffer. When we are dying, then we really die. When someone dearest to us dies, also really dies. Everything appears to us as real. Even when we dream, dreams also appear to us as real. That's why we have nightmares, or we have a joyful dream, and so forth. So this reification is really what binds us constantly to samsara, or to this world, conditioned by suffering and ignorance. And the problem is that it comes with every instant of consciousness. It's so deep that we need a system, we need something that trains the mind to increase its own lucidity, clarity, to detect that and go beyond it and destroy reification. And in that case, then, this same mind, which actually it is an expression of my Buddha nature, that is coming, that whole cognitive immensity of Buddha nature, it is coming through the whole structure, false structure of ego, the I, the emotions, and the negative afflictions, and so forth, then turns into this intellect, intellectual cognizance, intellectual knowing, and all the kinds of emotions, bad emotions that we may have, like jealousy, pride, and so forth. In essence, we never left our Buddha nature. And in essence, Buddha nature is expressed in anything we perceive. We need to develop that ability to perceive it in anything that appears and that we experience. And that ability is what is taught in the Buddhist path. So that is why Buddhism, or the Dharma of Buddhism, is considered to be a method. That's all it is. The Dharma is something that will, as they say, once you cross the river with a boat and you reach the other shore, you don't take the boat with yourself. You just leave it. And then that is what the Dharma is also. It's like you use it and brings the mind to its own nature, and then we become totally in tune with our basic being, our enlightened state. And then relative reality starts to also reflect that kind of perfection in our actions, in our thoughts, in our perception, in everything. Well, how will that be? I don't know. I run out of time, so we can talk about that.
Thank you. You're describing this, this long habituated process where underneath it all is the Buddha nature, that is our birthright, that is uncontestable, that has always been there and always will be there. And then there's layers of misperception on top of that, and has been for, you said that there are multiple lifetimes that are contributing to this habitual pattern that, if you go back lifetime to lifetime to lifetime, all the way back to the beginning of life, nearly 4 billion years, or the beginning of the planet, 14 billion years, that's a lot of habit.
Yeah.
And now we're living in this moment. We talked last night about the threshold moments, the pivots. And we're living in this moment where all the faith traditions are pointing toward this, right, in one way or another. And Buddhism has been laid out a science for this, as has other traditions. Buddhism for 2,500 years, although I've been hearing that for the 35 years I've been studying Buddhism. So 2,535 years at least, been pointing.
60.
And yet the habit continues. And I wonder if you imagine that at some point, with all of everything pointing toward this, and many, many more people in practice, do we reach a point where we have a consciousness threshold where everybody's habit can change at the same time? Or what's our hope in this?
Oh, everybody's consciousness changes at the same time.
I don't know. I'm just wondering, how do we get over the undertow of this habit? You hang out with folks who have done a lot of practice.
It is, yeah, it is, well, I've done a lot.
You've done a lot of practice yourself?
But it is an individual path, actually. Like, what we change is our perception or our experience. Anything that we do as practice, or what we call practice, different, all kinds of practices. Buddha taught many, many practices. They are all aimed at, first, to recognize that the nature of mind or the nature of our being, and then, well, the techniques can be very sophisticated and so forth, but that reflects in our perception. Anything we do in the path reflects on our perception. And our perception right now is extremely conditioned by habit. All habitual patterns. That's all I would even go further and say that if you try to find like some entity behind all this mass of habitual patterns that controls our perception, nobody has imposed those perceptions, those habits on us. We have created it, and we keep creating them instant to instant because we perpetuate duality and also reification. So, but if we try to find some kind of entity behind these habits, it's difficult to find, That means to say that there is some kind of mere identity behind it, but not really a solid identity. So the only way is not that we change our perception. When we change our perception, then also as a reflection, the other people will be inspired, like the inspiration we get from masters, that are in the continuity of that basic knowing, transcendent knowing, and they manifest the qualities that are also quite special, qualities of compassion, wisdom, and so forth, and they inspire us to also emulate them, and like that. So, then we can inspire others through our realization, but we cannot really go around and change people because it's very difficult to change ourselves. Imagine to change other people, right? So in that way, like interconnectedness or interdependence is a complete result of this absolute truth that I was talking, that you cannot say, nothing has an intrinsic identity. Therefore, everything still appears. But why does it appear? It appears because they are all interdependent to each other. Things arise from causes and conditions. There's nothing that does not arise from causes and conditions. Even like when you talk about like right, then it's because it depends on the left. It's not that left or right arose or from the causes and conditions of each, but it's just like that. This whole way of that we experience at the relative level. Then, as a result of knowing and living the absolute level, everything is seen as this interbeing or interconnected. I had to use the word, because that's the subject matter.
Thank you. Thank you. My mind is a little blown. Any quick questions for Gerardo from the others on our panel, or we can save it for a broader dialogue?
I'm just finding myself thinking a little bit about my favorite Bishop Catherine story, and I hope it's a true story because if Bishop Catherine's in the audience, but as it was told to me, there was some general convention in which a sermon was preached by aforementioned bishop who said there was no such thing as individual salvation. And well, this was quite startling, enough to get the House of Bishop to rock on its heals a little bit. Our whole practice system is based on it, you know. What about sin, penance, confession of sin? But the point is that if you have a religion in which the mark of salvation, as they call it in Christianity, is the capacity to love your neighbor as yourself, then there can be no individual salvation, because it exists as essentially, if you want to push the language all of a sudden, it's an emergent property of the field. Well, I found myself wondering that same thing as you spoke about Buddha nature. It may be that the confusion that keeps running through so much of this, and the difficulty for so many people in the habits, is that we keep thinking about realizing my Buddha nature. But there is no my Buddha nature if there is only Buddha nature, and from some different perceptivity we get to jump into it and dance in it. I don't know, but it's you know, from the point of view, are we using individual filters to talk about something whose identity can only be realized at a level of realized interbeing? Just a question.
This individual salvation, in some of the teachings of Buddhism, then one aspires to the individual salvation. But actually, like most of the teachings of Buddhism, they speak very much about, yes, you may have an individual salvation, but together with that comes like an unlimited compassion that then forces you to completely, not forces you, but I mean it's completely automatic, then you can never leave anybody behind. So therefore you work also to help other beings to realize that freedom that you had found. But there's nothing wrong in talking about an individual salvation, because unless you are already transcendent, the ignorance kind of, or this unawareness of Buddha nature, then you cannot speak of oneself of being free. We are free when we are not dominated anymore by habits. When we have overcome the dualistic habits, then we can say that we are free. And that means to say that then that freedom, you don't keep it for yourself. You use it because you found the right path that leads to that, and therefore, you know, like it's not that you love others like yourself, you even love others more than yourself somehow. In the training of compassion, you develop that type of compassion. So you don't, one keeps on working and working and working.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Now, also when you say about Buddha nature, it is actually one thing that we have to, Buddha nature is kind of, like if you take, for instance, a mirror, then you have to view it like one taste, in the sense that everything is like, has the one taste of Buddha nature. Then that means to say that a mirror, for instance, can have 1,000 different images in it.
Yeah.
But the essence of each image is Buddha nature. Exactly. But that does not mean that each image has their own kind of shape or identity, somehow like that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Good, thank you. Let's have our Buddha natures stand and stretch for a moment. Let a little space in there. And I think we are going to hear soon from Cynthia, but we have an interlude of song. So I'd like to ask Paulette Myers to come up on stage.
I just want to say how grateful I am to be here. And it's such a privilege to be able to carry a little bit of the Quaker message in this realm. I just want to say that I first really got enthralled with the Quaker faith from the readings of the 19th century founders. And I was reading Cynthia's book, Wisdom Way of Knowing, at one point, and I thought, wow, she's saying everything's about early Christianity here. What she's saying just reminds me of early Quakers. And Quakers didn't really fit in with the Protestant camp of Christians or the Catholic camp. They were just so unique in the 17th century, and it was kind of a outpouring of a mystical outbreak in a sense. And that's when I sent this CD to Cynthia saying, do you know about early Quakers? Everything you're saying sounds like what they experienced is mysticism, really. So I want to share just another quote from George Fox, who's kind of known as the founder. And then I'd like to teach another one to you all and have you sing it with me. But the first one I'll sing by myself. I saw that there was an ocean of darkness and death, but an infinite ocean of light and love, which flowed over the ocean of darkness. In that I also saw the infinite love of God, and I had great openings. I'll sing it again. I saw that there was an ocean of darkness and death, but an infinite ocean of light and love, which flowed over the ocean of darkness. In that I also saw the infinite love of God, and I had great openings. So this next song I want to teach you and have you chant it with me is actually from a little later in Quaker history, once they came to the United States and started doing very radical things like trying to get into the state of the colony of Massachusetts that didn't allow Quakers to come in. And there were 3 people who were hung in Boston Commons, 3 Quakers, 1 woman and 2 men, for continuing to press for religious freedom and being able to go where they would be called to go. And this next quotation is from one of those who were hung, William Robinson, and this is what in his writings right before he was hung. It's a very powerful statement. I think it fits with the theme that a lot of the things we're talking about today. And what I'll do is I'll say it, then I'll sing it through once, and then I'll teach it in some parts, because it's a little long, but you'll get it. My mind just went blank. The streams of my Father's love run daily through me, from the holy fountain of life to the seed throughout the whole creation. The streams of my Father's love run daily through me. The streams of my Father's love run daily through me. From the holy fountain of life to the seed throughout the whole creation. When I sing this together with people, I like to change it from the father to mother, so we'll alternate like that. And I'll sing a line and you repeat, so we'll be call and response. The streams of my Father's love run daily through me. Streams of my Father's love run daily through me. And we repeat that. The streams of my Father's love run daily through me. From the holy fountain of life, from the holy fountain of life to the seed throughout the whole creation. To the seed throughout the whole creation. Let's sing Mother this time. The streams of my mother's love run daily through me. The streams of my mother's love run daily through me. From the holy fountain of life to the sea throughout the whole creation. The streams of my Father's love run daily through me. The streams of my Father's love run daily through me. From the holy fountain of life to the sea throughout the whole creation. The streams of my mother's love run daily through me. The streams of my mother's love run daily through me. From the holy fountain of life to the sea throughout the whole creation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Cynthia,
Yes,
would you
ma'am.
please join this conversation?
I thought you'd never ask. Well, we're woken up now. Yeah. So how do I stand? I think my body needs to do this, not just my top half, but I want to not just turn my back to my distinguished elders.
We're right with you.
All right. So, okay. What I'm going to do is basically just say everything you've said, both of you, but in a slightly different frame and in a mashup way. I'm speaking from the Christian inner tradition. Please don't take anything that I'm about to say as Orthodox Christianity, or we'll all have an unhappy time. Nor is it even straight up contemplative Christianity, but it's informed by the wild men and women of the Eastern Orthodox tradition, Sufism, and some of these outpockets of Celtic and other mysticism where they've dived deep down the rabbit hole. So in the traditions that I've been working on and in, this word being is not something you are. Usually in the philosophical tradition, being is sort of a synonym for existence. This thing has being. But in the inner tradition, being is something you have. It's an energy. It's a gathered presence. It's a mindful, fierce attentiveness in your body, grounded in your feet, centered lower than your head, in the region of your heart and your torso. Here, feet deeply in contact with our mother, the earth. Head in contact with the skies, but here, in the belly, in the heart. And in this configuration, not only are you truly present, but that presence is an energized presence. It communicates. It has a force. It beams out. It gives and receives as its own kind of sonar. And a person who has being can walk into a room and say absolutely nothing. And everybody knows that person's there. Such is the force of being. All of your tradition knows it well. All of our tradition is almost clueless. But we get it in our own sort of ways. So, in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, it was implicitly understood that this being gathered, that the name they called for this was attention of the heart, or in the heart. And they kept saying, you must bring your attention into your heart. Your mind must be within your heart. Come down, and it's clear in the text, they're not just talking about a nice little attitude about, oh, let's just be in touch with our feelings. They mean at the physical level of sensation, to be able to ground and shift your attention in this mid-reason as a whole alert presence. And when that happens, more energized, more alive, more awake, gradually a new operating system of perception kicks in. And the reason it hasn't kicked in earlier, the reason why we keep slipping back into the mind with its constant dualizing, is because that's the only being energy we have enough to run. It's not until we can gather our being in a more gathered presence that we have the higher, finer, more intense vibrational field that allows these other beautiful, mysterious, and more subtle and energized faculties of perception to kick in. When William Blake was talking about we are here on earth a little while to learn to bear the beams of love, that's what he's talking about, those beams. But when that happens, when the mind comes into the heart, a different kind of knowingness happens. And you can label it and you can borrow from Western versions of Eastern terminology and call it non-dual. The name has no force. It's a description by negation. In the traditions from which it comes, it's called sometimes seeing with the eye of the heart, seeing from the nous in the Greek, the nous being the eye of the heart. It's sometimes called contemplation, and contemplation doesn't mean resting in emptiness. The original definition was knowledge impregnated by love. Interesting. Try that in the halls of higher science. Knowledge impregnated by love. In other words, actually working in a whole different vibrational field. A way in which you're no longer using the mind, which unfortunately runs the egoic operating system. The middle hardwiring is perception through differentiation. That's why we keep slipping back into dualism, because that's the way the mind perceives. It has to split the field to make inside, outside, me, it, subject, verb, as you said, do unto this, do unto that, because that's the operating system we run. And when we run that operating system, whose whole basic algorithm is perception through separation, how in the living hell are you going to perceive unity? It outruns the operating system. You just can't do it, because to actually perceive unity, you have to perceive from unity. And to try to perceive unity using the mind, meaning the rational facility, is like trying to take your old Underwood typewriter, if you could still remember what those are, and asking it to run the internet. It can't do it. It outruns the operating system. It's not because of the sinful self-will of the typewriter. It's just because it can't do unity with a programming that it relies on separation. So it's not a matter of shooting the mind, lobotomizing the mind. It's a matter of bringing the mind into the heart so it entrains with this deeper field, and in that knowledge, reaching out and actually perceiving by a kind of sonar, by a sympathetic vibrational intertwining, which allows you to get on the inside of everything. Suddenly, you see. And what you see is interbeing. Okay? You see, first of all, horizontally. And what you see when you look out on that horizontal axis, with the mind and the heart, with knowledge impregnated by love, grounded and present, is you really do see oneness directly. not as a vicarious concept, not as an ideal called non-dualism, as an actual luminous web, everything connected to everything else within one glowing and very dynamic feedback field. That's what Jesus saw when he walked the planet as probably the first representative of this in the West, and said, love your neighbor as yourself, not as much as yourself. We added as much as yourself in with that old typewriter operating program that says, I have to love me first, and then I can love everybody else. Love your neighbor as yourself. Virtual particles, interchangeable within the field. Okay? Can you do that? Not with the mind. Yes, with the mind and the heart. And when he told us that's most brilliant and difficult of his parables about the laborers in the vineyard, remember the guys that show up at 5:30 in the morning and get hired to work, and the guys that show up 12 hours later, and when they get paid, they all get paid the same? You know, when you're in your mind, you will immediately say, it's not fair. Because what are you keeping track of? More and less, right? That's the mind. When you're in the heart, you see that what the landowner sees is a participational field in which being invited into the vineyard has nothing to do with getting his crops harvested or earning a living or beating out the other guys with the competitive edge. It has to do with creating a participational field. Why are you standing idle, he asks. And they say, because no one has hired us. You too. Go into the vineyard. Go into the field. Go into the collective interbeing Buddha nature, which is divine consciousness made manifest in form. And there dance and give and take and see and be. So we see horizontally, and I think that it's only when our mind is in the heart that we will ever see it. The reason I believe that Christianity has made a hypocrisy of itself for 2,000 years is because we keep trying to do this beautiful vision, which is totally non-dual, totally fully interbeing oriented, with a mind that separates, that perceives scarcity and lack and competition, so we wind up making fools of ourselves. But it's not because the message is wrong, it's because the message hasn't been lived yet. Except by these beautiful few that we remember as the ones who truly had being on this path and who passed it on. We also see, when we look through these eyes, we see worlds within worlds within worlds. When you were talking so beautifully about all these spirit worlds and things that these shifty-eyed white people didn't even think existed. Oh, they exist. Yes, and all the sacred traditions, wisdom traditions, have affirmed. They call them by different names. They call them the subtle world, the spirit world, the thin places, liminal spaces. My own languaging for it is the imaginal realm. And it's a realm that surrounds and envelops ours like a beautiful placenta enveloping the womb of our little finite planet. And in this, information and substance and nutrients are exchanged, and we receive help, and we give back help, and we find our place, and we transform the fruits of our lifetime into other things, things we're tasting here. Generosity, forbearance, truth, goodness, light, joy. And these become substances which nurture our planet. And when we fail to do that as human beings, and when instead what we put out into the planet is greed and isolation and separation and competition and, we're putting poison into the planet, spiritual poison, which is as toxic and as causative as the lethal poisons we put in with our gas and our pollution and everything else. It is our human place when we understand the worlds within worlds to participate in the generation of these wonderful things. They're called in the Christian tradition the fruits of the Spirit, which are our alchemical contribution to the life, the health, the beauty of this wonderful body of interbeing that we are. And only in making that contribution can we find our place, our meaning, our wholeness, and our relatedness with everything. But we need these maps that are large enough to tell us that. You're not going to get it in traditional faith. You're not going to get it in traditional rational science. We need groups of practitioners like this that have the boldness to go back and find the new, old, indigenous wisdom maps, boldly shift them from an individual perspective, which dominated the axial age, into this new, genuinely higher collective vision. Imagine Buddha nature, salvation, emergent properties of the whole, not available in the individual cell, except as we participate. Wonderful, wonderful way of thinking how we belong together. But these are just kind of little things I want to throw out with you to tease you with and to affirm how what's being said in so many different ways and voices by so many gifted teachers from these traditions is really good, true, profound, liberating reorientation for our own age. And what I'd like to do, if I can, is to end my little segment of this by calling Paulette back up on the stage again. And I hope they didn't take away your mic. There it is. And I want us to sing that, the streams of my Father's love, again, but I want you all to stand as you do it. And plant your feet on the ground like we did this morning, if you can remember back that early. And the text, the streams of my Father's love flowed daily through me from the holy fountain of life, from some great vast thing, to the seed, that's D at the end, the seed throughout the whole creation. There's this art of exchange, of giving and receiving, of nurturance, virtual, horizontal, that flows right through the awake human heart. And as we sing it this time, and we'll sing it twice, see if you can actually sense that in yourself. See if you can sense that even right here and now, you are part of a vast, cascading, dynamic web of exchange, whose final name is love. Okay, my dear.
The streams of my Father's love run daily through me. The streams of my Father's love run daily through me. From the holy fountain of life to the sea throughout the whole creation. The streams of my mother's love run daily through me. The streams of my mother's love run daily through me. From the holy fountain of life to the sea throughout the whole creation.
And may that seed bear fruit in each one of us and in our one cosmos. Thank you. Back to the next one.
Beautiful. Thank you. Cynthia, you spoke about the operating system that is, as Gerardo pointed to, so habitual, that divides and separates, and mostly that's what we're walking around in. And yet you created an experience for us in which maybe we had a taste of a different operating system. And there was a personal practice part of that involved, dropping our consciousness to our heart. And there was a collective practice of that involved. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to what you see as possible through gatherings like this, where there's an intentionality to change our habitual ways of perceiving and practice, and a container held that supports this dropping. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think I would say in the first place that we sometimes put the emphasis on the wrong thing, and we kind of beat ourselves up and shame ourselves about, well, I changed my habit. I think at the final analysis, it's an energetic issue more than a moral issue, or even, strictly speaking, a perceptual issue. Because until you have gathered and collected your presence sufficiently, you're going to run the old default system because it runs at a lower energy. It's all you can do. And so until a certain reservoir, certain critical threshold of beingness is generated and maintained, it's impossible to escape the gravitational field of dualistic, egoic, middle rational thinking. And the problem with our Western world is we've just said that that's the only thinking there is. We've refused to acknowledge there's any other fields out there. But so I think that experiences like this, traditionally, this kind of energy boosting and gathering and centering has been done through sacred devotion and ritual. You know, and it happens even very quietly in meditation. And it happens really profoundly in some of the more exuberant rituals, from Sufi turning to, you know, sweat lodges to all sorts of wonderful things. I got to go to spend some time with the Bhutanese Buddhists not long ago, and still playing on the vast horns and the banging of the drums, and just something in the whole being wakes up. And so I think that in the collective gatherings with the intention to essentially raise our energy field, not just to have a spiritual high, but to make something possible in perception that we can remember and walk out of. You know, we can't disregard energy. We can't disregard the life force that runs through our connection with humanity, or our connection with all sentient beings. And we think we can cut ourselves off from the life force and just observe it and talk about it. We're fools.
Thank you. We have another 15 minutes or so, and you've each spoken from very different histories, different lineages, pointing toward this idea of interbeing, this experience of interconnection. I'm wondering if you have comments, questions, thoughts for each other.
Well, I wanted to, one of the things that I think is really a different orientation when we consider all of us as interbeing, a single organism that is reliant on each other for well-being. I was told that one of the first separations came when we could say, I am okay, even though you don't have what you need, I can be okay having what I need. And so, you know, it's to really take in interbeingness, you know, and so for us, we use that symbol of the sacred hoop. And so what that means is that every single action, and this gets kind of overwhelming in a way, but it means every single action I take has a direct effect on everything else, right? And so what we insert into that system, I mean, really, if we take that in for a minute, what we insert into that system, into that inner being, is so important. It's so important. So you were talking about the toxicity of jealousies and such that we insert in that. But I also want to point out that, you know, so once we turn this tool, this Rottweiler,
Yeah.
once we turn this Rottweiler loose and say, what we need to figure out is, how can I get more for me? This one will do it. This one's really good at something like that. And that's what I feel like we're seeing. But so in that sense, you know, what tends to come up is bigger, faster, splashier, more. Let's think, you know, I've been hearing this term, let's bring it to scale is one of our favorite terms right now, which I guess means like the whole world. We turn the Rottweiler loose on the whole world. It's kind of, you know, and I just think about that in contrast to my elders. And maybe even the way they're portrayed in movies gives you some sense of this. You know, 10 bears and dances with wolves, or maybe that was Little Big Man, I forget. But if you notice, their demeanor is quiet. Their words are a little bit spare. So I think this is actually true in most faith traditions, which is when you really start entering into that zone, and I love how you say that. It's not that we don't need the mind, but bringing the mind down into the heart is that place where we can perceive the reality of our situation, which is that we are interbeing. You know, we say that, you know, we have to consider every movement and how it's going to affect the next 7 generations. So, you know, as I'm sitting in this chair, if I say, I'm going to move from here to here, it doesn't seem like all that much until you head out in time 7 generations, and suddenly it's like this, right? So the scale of our movement and motions in the world at this time, to me, is also, without that understanding of us being interbeing, you know, we are willing to make the big, bold moves. But if we really take in what interbeing means, I think that we would be moving with a great deal more caution. We'd be making smaller movements. We'd be making, we'd have to really think about what is an activity that we can really go for, you know, with all of our passion. Because to really turn that part of our fire loose into this interbeing is a big deal, right? And so what are the categories that really make sense for us to do that in? And in modern world right now, I feel like, you know, gathering resources is not a place for that. Attainment of acquisition, I should say, is not necessarily the place for that. So I feel like, you know, I'm thinking about my elders, and I'm thinking, and really the elders of all the spiritual traditions, one of their hallmarks is they're quiet. Their movements are subtle and slow. And to me, that's a signal of this recognition of what it means to place anything into that pond of inner being. So it's a very different orientation from what certainly I was raised with in academia and in other ways. But I just wanted to bring that in terms of that toxicity factor that you spoke of.
I think you've spoken to that beautifully and subtly, because that is the characteristic in all the sacred traditions I'm aware of the ones that have being. Yeah, that it is the characteristic of the ones that have real being. They see from farther down the pike and move much more deliberately and more subtly and less flamboyantly, you might say. And yet the movement has force when it's placed. Mm-hmm. Real force, and you can feel that happening.
Mm-hmm. Force and harmony, maybe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think also that when you start to understand that everything that appears can only appear in terms of interdependence, because nothing has like an intrinsic identity. If we talk about intrinsic identity, well, maybe we'll go a little bit into philosophy, but you know, something that is real, we have to redefine what real means in Buddhist terms. It's something that cannot change. That means to say it has to be permanent. It also has to be singular, cannot be formed by parts, because if you separate all the parts, then there is no identity left. it has no, it doesn't, it cannot change. It's easy to see, because if it changes from instant A to instant B, then again, what are you talking about? And the same happens with that it has to be autonomous. It cannot depend on things. So once we define that, then how is it that everything appears? It appears, but in terms of interdependence. Still, you can perceive, and everything is fine, but we already start to kind of reduce that tendency to reify everything. And so when you see everything is interdependent, then also that is used, because it's not some kind of, some kind of false idea or fantasy that you've created. That is the way it is. You have analyzed it, and that's the way it is. Then at a relative level also, in relation with all the others, then we also have to acknowledge how interconnected we are, but even in our own survival, in the sense that, I mean, we cannot separate ourselves from the world, but also in terms of empathy and gratitude and, you know, like compassion and loving kindness and so forth. I mean, what would our life be if we completely did not depend on any being for us to survive? It would be impossible. I mean, just even in the earlier kind of human beings, you know, when they were not so developed, no, like with education and so forth, still they depended on nature, they depended on other beings, they depended on many things. If I want to make a cup of tea, then we forget how many different factors are involved in making that cup of tea. There's some guy who woke up at 4 in the morning in Sri Lanka and then, you know, worked, and then there's the owner of the plantation that pays, or like didn't pay enough, but they're not paid. And then there's also the transport that came, and then there's also the water that I'm using, also the guy that made the pot, and also the cup, everything, all these factors together. And then all these factors together, you make a cup of tea. We're never aware of that. We see tea, that's all. But of course, it doesn't mean that we always have to be aware of all that every time we make a cup of tea, because by the time we make it, it's already cold, you know. Then we have to repeat the process, you know. So then, but of course, this is some kind of reasoning, which is quite, I mean, it makes common sense, but by habituating ourselves to thinking in this way, then we already start to relate to the world in a different way, in a way in which there is a sense of gratitude and a sense of empathy and so forth. They are enhanced. We don't know their names, we don't know their faces, we don't know who they are, but we depend on so many beings for anything we do. We take a bus, anything we do, there's someone who's doing it. You know, somebody will say, well, but I pay for it, you know, and that's the end of it, period. I paid for it. I don't have to think about all the other things. Well, I think that is a very limited way of approaching it, right? So then we have to change a little bit that mindset. Then another, sorry, just to finish it, you know, like one of the problems, when we all want to be happy and nobody wants to suffer. I mean, that is common to all of us. I mean, animals, a worm, a cow, all of us human beings and other beings. I mean, it is like that. But then, again, I go into this separateness that is a result of duality. When there is duality and there is that sense of separateness, then inexorably there will be a sense of anxiety, because you have to relate to some kind of world that appears to our perception as separate. And when there is anxiety, then that is the root also of suffering, because there cannot be well-being or constant well-being when there is a sense of anxiety. So then you start to see the connection between the cognitive aspect and also the emotional aspect. Why is so important, according to Buddhism, is it so important to know the truth, to know how things are in the real nature? Not because then we have discovered something at the level of philosophy that then seems to be so high and so amazing and then doesn't have any kind of application or result in our life. No. I mean, the reason why we are not aware of what we are, and then that we live on the basis of an assumption, because we are not aware and still we live, that is called ignorance. Because of ignorance is that we suffer. So therefore, you know, that which is a cognitive problem of misunderstanding becomes the main cause of our emotional kind of upheavals and, like lack of well-being and so forth. So therefore, it has to be really approached. That is the main point. In Buddhism, the main point, as His Holiness Dalai Lama says, the main point for Buddhists is to know the truth. That's the one, yeah.
Perception and practice together.
Yeah.
I keep being reminded of an image that comes from the Hindu tradition about the story of Indra's web. Are any of you familiar with that? It's a wisdom story of the reality of all that is. And imagine an infinite spider web that goes out in all directions, infinitely and on all planes. And along that spider web are perfect dewdrops extending in every direction, such that every dewdrop reflects every other dewdrop on its surface. And anything that is done to any one dewdrop affects every other dewdrop as well. And I think that's some of what we're talking about the interbeing, that the perception of the interconnectivity of everything. The truth is that everything we add affects everything, even if we feel isolated, separated. That it's not the case. We are fundamentally interconnected. And when we drop the mind, which is oriented toward dividing, into the heart, which is oriented to connecting, and into place, which is oriented to teach us over time, something starts to begin to shift in that perception and practice.
Yeah, and I think one of the other important aspects of this topic of interbeing, there's this cautionary part, which I think we have to bring forward at this time on the planet about, what we do. So the upliftment of one is the upliftment of all, which doesn't necessarily fit too well with capitalism. So there are some problems there, and but there's another whole piece that I like to say, and because we have the young people here, I kind of have to stand up for this and say, you gotta want your life. You gotta want your life like this. You gotta want it. You gotta want it. You gotta want it. And you know what nobody ever told me when I was young, so I'm gonna say it, is your joy matters. Your joy matters. And I think maybe they didn't say it to me because they were pretty sure that I was going to have to sacrifice my joy in this life. So we don't talk to our young people about joy. And that's kind of criminal, really, I think. I mean, it's a failing for us. And it's because, we have this idea that we're going to have to give up our joy somewhere along the way, so it's better to just not even bring it up. Well, no. Your joy matters, and I'm going to even go so far as to say your joy is your compass. Mm-hmm. When you're getting into that deep joy, that means you're getting close to perhaps your purpose. And so, for me, to go through this world with only the lens of intellect is leaving out so many opportunities for magic and mystery in this beautiful creation that we're in. It's so playful. It's so interactive. I would not be surprised if when I was singing that eagle song if we didn't have eagles circling right above this place. I mean, I'm not kidding. So this way of being interbeing, when we're in it in our joy, this place lights up. Like you would say to yourself, am I still on the same planet? It's really been almost that radical for me to shift out of that singular way of knowing into interbeing awareness. And so that's one of the good news about the opening up to this interbeing understanding. Yeah.
Thank you. Can we give our esteemed guests